The Arab Advance on Egypt. This audio presentation is read and voiced by Shakim Ra. It is provided to the public by Amin Ra University. After the surrender of Jerusalem by the aged patriarch Sophronius, it seems that both the Caliph Omar and his general Amir ibn el-Asi turned their steps northward. Amir at least was sent to take part in the siege of Caesarea, while Omar fixed his headquarters at Damascus. It was probably at Jerusalem that Amir unfolded his plan for the invasion of Egypt, but the time was not then judged propitious. When, however, fortune still shone on the Muslim arms and the Syrian campaign was more nearly over, Amir renewed his proposal to Omar, pointing out the case and the ease with which Egypt could be conquered, and the vastness of the prize. There was no country in the world, he said, at once so wealthy and so defenseless. He also reminded Omar that Aratian, the Roman governor of Jerusalem, who had escaped before the capitulation and fled to Egypt, was there, rallying the imperial forces, and that no more time should be lost in striking. Moreover, the possession of Egypt would greatly strengthen the power of the Muslims. This conference between the two leaders took place at Al-Jarbiyah near Damascus in the autumn of the year 639 AD, while the siege of Caesarea was still proceeding. Omar saw that the conquest of Egypt was desirable, but that Amir underrated the difficulties of it, since he was unable to weaken the forces in Syria by detaching an army strong enough for the purpose. When Amir offered to start a force of 3,500 or 4,000 men, the commander of the faithful in wavering mood could only promise to think it over, and Amir returned to Caesarea, where Constantine, son of Heraclius, was now in command of the city. There, however, a letter from Omar followed him, borne by Sharik ibn Adhab. It sanctioned the plan for the invasion of Egypt, but ordered Amir to keep it secret and to lead his force southward by easy stages. Amir accordingly departed at dead of night and marched his little army of horsemen without incident toward the borderland of Palestine and Egypt. He had already reached Rafah, one stage from the Egyptian El Arish, when messengers spurred in hot haste into his camp, bearing dispatches from the Caliph. Amir shrewdly guessed their tenor. Omar's doubts and hesitations had ailed and led him to repent his decision. The Caliph had spoken to Othman about the perils of the enterprise, and Othman not only thought the hazard very great, but reminded Omar that the rash and adventurous character of Amir was certain to hurry him into disaster. Omar, therefore, was seriously disquieted and resolved, if possible, to recall the expedition. But he felt that if Amir's force were already in Egypt, it would be a confession of weakness and a dishonor to the Muslim name to retreat before the enemy. The dispatch accordingly ordered Amir to return if he was still in Palestine, while if he were in Egypt, he must go forward. In that case, Omar would pray for his victory and was sent to the plow and was not the man to turn back. He knew that the letter boded no good to his project, and he refused to receive it until he had crossed the torrent bed, which perhaps marked the frontier, and reached the little valley of Arish. There he read it and asked, "Is this place in Syria or in Egypt?" And when the answer was, "In Egypt," he read the dispatch aloud before his officers and said, "The army will advance in accordance with the caliph's orders." Amir no doubt got the answer he wanted, but it is curious to remark that although Arish or Reno Kalora was generally regarded as within the Egyptian frontier, the matter was not free from doubt. It is clear, however, that the town, although fortified, was not held by a Roman garrison. Yet, even as late as the 13th century might be seen the ruins of two splendid ancient churches and the remains of the city wall along the seafront, while the finest marbles and the largest columns at that time, found in Cairo, were strangely said to have come from Arish. From this point, too, according to some authorities, started the Great Wall of Egypt, which ran across the Kulzum or Suez, and thence up the eastern bank of the Nile as far as the First Cataract. This wall, attributed to Sesostris but called by the Arabs the Wall of the Old Woman, had long been broken down, so that it offered no hindrance to the movement of an army, even in the 7th century, though fragments of its ruins may be seen at Jabal al-Tayib and other places in Egypt today. It was on the 10th Dehu al-Hijjah, on December 12, 639 AD, that Amir's little force celebrated the Muslim Day of Sacrifice, or Feast of Offerings, or Feast of Pilgrims, as it was variously called. The rite was not without solemnity for this band of desert warriors who were setting out to conquer the land of the pharaohs, leagued as they were by ties of clanship and devotion to the great chieftain who led them. Most of Amir's following belonged to the tribe of Ak, although Al-Kindi says that 1/3 were of the tribe of Gafik, and Ibn Dukmak gives a list of Roman converts to Islam from Syria who were in the Arab army. He also mentions Persian converts from the region of Yaman as taking part in the conquest, though these were probably enrolled among the reinforcements which the Caliph sent later to Egypt. And what that of Amir himself? The Chronicles gives many of his sayings and a good deal of information about his character. And in a history of the conquest of Egypt, it cannot be out of place to furnish some sketch of the conqueror. Amir ibn el-Asi was somewhere about 45 years old at the time of the invasion of Kemet. Short in stature, though strongly built, his athletic and hardy frame excelled in those feats of horsemanship and swordsmanship which Western chivalry has learned to link with the name of Saracen. That he was broad-shouldered and broad-chested, that he had dark, piercing eyes, quickly kindling to anger or humor, heavy eyebrows, and a large mouth, that his face, though powerful, was without sternness, wore indeed a pleasant and cheerful expression, that he used a black cosmetic for dyeing his beard. These are almost all the details of his outer appearance which have come down in history. The statement that he stammered is probably erroneous. It is true that Abu al-Mahassin records this as Amir's one defect of body. On the other hand, it is known that Amir was remarkable for the quickness and wit of his repartees, as well as for his sustained eloquence, and the idea that he stammered seems found on a misunderstanding. For it is related that Omar, once hearing a man stammer, remarked, "I declare that the maker of this man and the maker of Amir are one, which meant not that Ahmir was given to stammering, but that God made the speechless and the most eloquent alike. Just as Ahmir himself on one occasion, when provoked by a shallow fellow, smothered his scorn in the remark, "He too is God's creature." But the story has been misconstrued by some Arab writers and taken to prove that Ahmir also stammered. Such a construction would make Almar's saying both rude and pointless, and it would seem to clash with the fact of Ahmir's eminence as well as that of his eloquence. For it is hardly conceivable that if Ahmir had suffered from this defect, he would have been singled out from the beginning by Muhammad as a capable leader, or could ever have become a great commander. It may also be added that Ahmir acted as imam, or leader of prayer, to the end of his days, and that Muslim law expressly forbids anyone to take that office who stammers. The story that Ahmir had this defect is quite unworthy of belief. For the rest, there are many sayings and stories which illustrate his life and character. He was of the tribe of Quraysh, and his genealogy is known to tradition. He was once asked, "What delayed your conversion to Islam so long in spite of your intelligence?" And he answered that he was overawed by the authority of his betters, but that as he grew older and more independent, reflection taught him to slacken in his opposition to the Prophet. When the Quraysh sent one of their number to question him, Ahmir asked his question whether the Arabs held the true religion, or the Persians, or the Romans. On being told the Arabs, he said, "Are we or they the wealthier?" "They are." Then he said, "What advantage have we over Persians and Romans if there is no life to come, since in this life they have all the advantage over us?" Ahmir went on to say that he became convinced of the truth of Muhammad's doctrine of a resurrection, and of rewards and punishments after death, and so he resolved to give up what was false in the old Arab religion. Some say that Ahmir was in Abyssinia at the time of his conversion, which was brought about by Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. After the Battle of the Chains, Ahmir was made governor of Uman, and there remained till the death of Muhammad. A year or two afterwards, he was sent by Abu Bakr as one of the generals in the Syrian expedition. There, his reputation both as a hard fighter and an able tactician was immensely strengthened, and he ill-brooked the superior command which Omar on his accession gave to Abu Ubaidah. But perhaps the most striking passage about the conqueror of Egypt is that which records a speech made by Amir in self-defense when Muawiyah was charged with unduly favoring him. "I am the man who at the Battle of Siffin quoted the verse, 'When other eyes faltered, mine never quailed. I have closed my eyes to their failure, but not to danger. Remember how again and again I returned to the charge. I bear good and evil fortune alike. I am inexorable like the serpent at the root of the tree. Before God, I am no sluggard or weakling. I am the deaf adder, from whose bite none may recover, whose sting renders a man sleepless. I am a man who shatters what he strikes, who turns to cinders what he kindles. At the battle of Harif, the foeman traducer may be applied to the words of the poet. If the tree of mine honor be made of gold, shall I not esteem it of higher worth than to be placed in competition with vile weeds, Language like this seems to reveal that the man in awe is self-confidence and consciousness of power. In the dispute which followed the Battle of Siffin, Amir no doubt showed some unscrupulousness. Ada the Habib records how he clove through the false excuses and hypocrisy of Muawiyah at the time of the battle, exclaiming, "O Muawiyah, my heart has burnt with wrath while I have listened to your pretenses. Do you think that we are rebelling against Ali because our claims are more rightful than his? No, for God, it is only that we fly like dogs upon the riches of this world, and by God, I swear that you shall give me a share in your wealth, or else I fight not upon your side." In the matter of the arbitration, his action reads like a breach of faith with Abu Musa. The latter thereafter always mingled in his prayers curses against Amir, and he insulted his enemies, saying, "Amir's likeness is like the likeness of a dog. If you drive him away, he puts forth his tongue, and if you leave him alone, he puts forth his tongue." "And you," retorted Amir, "are the donkey laden with books, and none the wiser for them." Ibn el-Hajar records that one of his friends said of Amir, "I have never met a man who understood the Quran better or had a nobler character, or was more honest and open in his dealings." One named Jabiz is quoted as saying, "I never met a man more learned in the book of God than Omar. When I was in Muawiyah's company, I found none more gentle. When I was with Amir, I found a man of most intelligent conversation, a most excellent companion and counselor. Such was the captain of the 4,000 men who were bent on wresting Egypt from the grasp of the Caesars." Chapter 15, Opening of the Campaign. The alarm was now sounded throughout Egypt, and Cyrus, the Macacus, heard that the dreaded Saracens were coming. Some measures of defense he had taken already. A moat had been dug round the great castle of Babylon near Memphis. Other forts had been strengthened, and the walls of many cities which had suffered in the Persian invasion were repaired. But it is false to say that Cyrus now bought off the Arabs by a promise of tribute. That is the statement which Theophanes makes or seems to make, but most unfortunately the Greek historians are quite in the dark, both as to the facts and as to the order of events at this period. They neither examined nor understood what they recorded, and their confusion of dates and perversion of truth are such that they have served only as false lights, luring into quagmires nearly every modern writer who has followed them. There is no whisper or hint of any such arrangement of a tribute in any single Oriental writer, Persian, Arabic, Syriac, or Coptic, with the exception of the passage in the Severs copied by the Chronicon Orientale. The idea is a mere blunder of the Greek historians, a distorted image of a totally different and much later transaction, as will be set forth in due order. From the valley of Arish, with its groves of palm, the road passed nearly due westward, but away from the coast through a waste of desert, relieved by occasional watering places and villages. It was the immemorial high road to Egypt, the road which had witnessed the passage of the first prehistoric settlers in Kemet, the passage of Abraham, of Jacob and Joseph, of Cambyses, Alexander and Cleopatra of the Holy Family, of the Persian invaders. It was the road of merchants, travelers, and pilgrims at all times, and of the many caravans which here linked Asia to Africa. A few miles before reaching Pelusium, the way trends northwards. plunging among dunes or moving sandhills, but no Roman soldiers were met by the Arabs till they came within sight of the city. Pelusium, the Coptic Paramon, and the Arabic El Farama seem to have stood on an eminence about 1.5 miles from the sea. It possessed a harbor, possibly connected with the town by a canal, and the Pelusiac arm of the Nile here joined the sea. The city was ancient and strongly fortified, full of old Egyptian monuments as well as churches and monasteries. And as the key of Egypt on the eastern side, it was a place of the greatest importance, commanding the desert approaches, the coast, and a waterway leading into the delta. Yet it seems to have been poorly defended. The Persians, who were practiced in the art of siege warfare, had captured it with very little fighting, and they probably had made havoc with its walls, wrecking them in parts as they wrecked the churches. Still, the Romans had warning enough and might easily have repaired the damage. But the Arabs under Amir had no engineering skill or resources, and they had to capture the city by storm or starvation. We do not know the numbers of the garrison, but it is clear that the Saracen force was too weak to beleaguer the place, and there were frequent sallies. Desultory fighting lasted a month or 2 months, according to one authority, till at last one of the gates was seized in the repulse of a sally, and the city was taken. The first Arab to force his way through the gate was called Asmaika ibn Wala, al-Sabi, Mak Risi, and Abu el-Mahasin, who copied from him. And they mention a report that the Copts aided the Arabs at the siege, but it is certainly baseless. It seems a mere revival of the old falsehood which charged the Copts with aiding the Persians. It occurs, I believe, in no writer before the 14th century, and it seems refuted by the story of the capture which I have given. It is also inconsistent with the fact that the Arabs not only burnt the shipping and dismantled the fortress, but also, like the Persians, destroyed the remnant of the churches in Pelusium. Finally, the charge is in direct antagonism to the statement of the nearly contemporary John of Nicole, who says that the Copts did not lend any aid to the Muslim forces until after the enemy had taken possession of Fayum and all its territory. What point of time this denotes is doubtful. It is certain that it was subsequent to the capture of Babylon, and that the aid then given was very partial and limited. By the reduction of the Farama, the Arab forces had now secured their only line of communication and of retreat in case of disaster. They also had formed some measure of the gigantic task which lay before them, if they were ever to capture the far more powerful fortress of Babylon and the mighty city of Alexandria. Ahmir must have realized that without the promised reinforcements he was doomed to failure, and he knew that reinforcements could come by Farama alone. He could spare no troops to hold the town, and he was therefore more than justified in raising its defenses, making it useless to the enemy if recaptured. What the Romans were about, meanwhile, it is difficult to conjecture. Cyrus must have known that it was merely a question of time when the Muslim forces overrunning Syria would turn their arms against Egypt. The event was bound to come. Common prudence would have established posts of observation along the desert, at least as far out as Arish, to give timely warning, and would have prepared an army to concentrate on Pelusium. Had the Romans sent only 10,000 men to harass Amir's line of march, or had they mustered such an army under the fortress, they could have scarcely have failed to rout and crush the little force of Arabs, although even that result might have deferred for long the fate of Egypt. Instead of that, they did nothing. They trusted to the normal garrison to defend the town, and though they were in a sense surprised by the sudden advance of the Arabs, yet during the month of siege, they sent no troops to its relief or rescue. Their tame and needless loss of Pelusium was their first great blunder in war. Is it possible that one may call it the first act in the great betrayal of the empire by Cyrus? Had he already formed in his mind the plan for rendering the Patriarchate of Alexandria independent of Constantinople by an alliance with the Arabs against the empire? On no other theory does it seem possible to explain his action, at least in its later developments. It was now past the middle of January 640 AD, which year nearly coincided with the Muslim Age 19, when Ahmir resumed his march. His losses in the recent fighting were more than made good by a number of Beduins who, scenting war and plunder, had flocked to his standard. From the salt-encrusted country round Pelusium, he passed over a stretch of black shell-strewn sand till he reached the ancient Migdol to the southwest, thence to the point known as Alcantara on the Suez Canal. Here, the desert changes to a hard and pebbly surface, while its monotony is relieved by a few green patches of vegetation and reedy, brackish lagoons. The Arabs kept to the desert and probably made for Salahaya. Most ancient conquerors of Egypt, like Cambyses, took a different route, striking nearly due west from Pelusium to Senhor and Tanis, and thence up through the delta to Bubastis. But by this time, the swamps around Lake Masala had spread so as to render that route more difficult. Besides, Ahmir's army were all mounted and had no means of bridging canals or rivers. Moving then from Salahaya or Kasassin nearly due south, Ahmir crossed the hills of Wadi Tumilat near the place now known for the Battle of Tal al-Kabir. And when once he was clear of the Wadi, there he remained, but a short and easy march between him and Bilbias. Here, however, the Roman forces began to show some resistance. The scouts had watched the progress of the Arabs across the desert, but there had been no fighting besides some trifling skirmishes. The story that two bishops called Abu Maryam and Abu Maryam or Abu Martam were sent by the Mukakas to parley with the Arabs is somewhat legendary. No bishops of such name ever existed, and the incident may be a myth which has arisen from the boundless confusion caused in the minds of Arab historians by the perusal of documents in which matters of legend and history are hopelessly intermingled, while the text has been corrupted at the hand of careless copyists. Yet there is reason to think that some sort of deputation headed by a bishop did parley with Ahmir at this time. Tabari even relates that Ahmir urged the Copts to assist the Muslim forces on the ground of the kinship subsisting between Copts and Arabs through Hagar. The Copts argued that this relationship was somewhat shadowy, whereupon Ahmir granted them 4 days to consider the matter. But the Roman general had no need to ponder arguments of this kind. Artaban, as he is called by Arab writers, or Aretian, as he should be called, was probably the same person as the Roman governor of Jerusalem, who, we have seen, fled to Egypt when the city was about to surrender to Omar. As general of the Roman troops, he decided to force a battle, and on the second day after the parley, he surprised the Arab camp by a fierce onslaught at night. But the result was disastrous, and his force was cut to pieces. Still, the town of Bilbayis was strong enough to detain Ahmar for a full month, during which frequent encounters took place, and its capture caused some loss to the invaders. On the other hand, the Romans are said to have lost 1,000 killed and lost over 3,000 to prison. Amir was now but one day's march from the head of the delta. He passed by Heliopolis, still skirted the cultivated land, aimed for a point on the Nile called Dani, which lay to the north of Babylon and what is now the heart of Cairo. But the Roman troops were at length more alert and were not prepared to allow the seizure of this fortified position with its harbor and shipping, which were both of great strategical value. Several weeks accordingly passed in a series of indecisive engagements, which hurt the Romans little, but wore down slowly the numbers of the Muslims, already perilously weak for the enterprise on which they had ventured. Indeed, Ahmir was now in a somewhat serious predicament. He had now reconnoitered the country round and found that he could not hope with his present forces either to invest or storm the castle of Babylon, nor even to seize the city of Misr, which adjoined and nearly surrounded it. Their recent battles had not been so uniformly in favor of the Muslims as their enthusiasm and their fighting powers had led them to anticipate. It was known that Omar had promised to forward reinforcements, and Amir now sent urgent dispatches to press for their arrival, but there was no sign of their coming. Every day's delay was now a gain to the enemy, and it seemed that the issue of the war hung in the balance. Either scale might prove the scale of victory, but though the position was critical, it was not in the nature of the Saracen general to despair or think of retreat. Recognizing, however, the fact that his main objective, the capture of Babylon, was for the moment out of reach, Ahmir resolved on a diversion of singular boldness. His project was nothing less than to make a dash for the Fayoum, a rich province some 50 miles further south, but on the western bank of the Nile. For this purpose, the undisputed possession of Dani was essential, at least for a time, and he resolved to achieve it at all costs. How the place was carried is not known, but the demand which Ahmir made on the endurance of his men is shown by the anecdote of this period. He was speaking sternly to some of them in whom he had noticed a failure of strength or of heart, when a trooper murmured, "We are not made of iron." "Silence, you dog!" roared the commander. "If I am a dog," rejoined the trooper, "you are a leader of dogs," a remark which turned the laugh against Ahmir, and which seems to have gone unpunished. But the task was accomplished, and the capture of Dani established Ahmir's force on the Nile banks and enabled him to seize boats enough to transport his diminished army across the river